Welcome back to History Teller YT, where we bring the past to life, one story at a time. Today, we are diving into one of the most epic tales ever told, the Trojan War. This is a story of heroism, cunning, love, loss, and the devastating consequences of pride. From the fateful judgment of Paris to the legendary clash of Achilles and Hector, from the cunning of Odysseus to the ingenious Trojan Horse, we'll journey across the battlefields, the city walls of Troy, and into the hearts of heroes and kings alike. In this series, we will explore every twist and turn, from the causes of the war to the fall of Troy and the aftermath that shaped the Mediterranean world. You'll hear not only the mythic battles described in Homer's Iliad, but also what history and archaeology tell us about the real Troy. How real people lived, fought, and survived in one of the most legendary conflicts of all time. So sit back, make yourself comfortable, and prepare to hear the complete saga of the Trojan War, as History Teller YT takes you on a journey through 10 years of conflict, heroism, tragedy, and legacy. By the end, you'll see why Troy isn't just a story. It's a lesson in courage, strategy, and the enduring human spirit. Let's begin. Long before the clash of swords and the tales of mighty warriors, the world of the late Bronze Age was a mosaic of civilizations, each with its own culture, art, and political structure. It was a time when myth and history intertwined, when stories passed from generation to generation blurred the lines between reality and legend. In the Aegean region, Mycenaean Greece flourished. These were not simple city-states. They were organized kingdoms, fortified with massive walls, rich in art, pottery, and intricate trade networks. Their kings were powerful rulers, commanding armies and commanding loyalty through both fear and charisma. Among these kingdoms, the city of Troy, situated in what is now modern-day Turkey, emerged as a dominant force. Its strategic location near the Dardanelles gave it control over the vital trade routes connecting the Aegean to the Black Sea, which made it not only wealthy, but also a target for ambitious neighbors. The walls of Troy, as described in Homer's Iliad, were legendary for their strength and the craftsmanship involved in their construction. Archaeological evidence from Heinrich Schliemann and later excavations revealed that Troy was indeed a fortified city with multiple layers of settlement, each built upon the ruins of its predecessor. This suggests a continuity of urban culture and a city resilient through centuries of warfare and natural disasters. In this era, wealth meant influence, and control of trade meant power. Troy's prosperity was a magnet for attention, admiration, and ultimately, envy. Its kings and rulers were not mere monarchs. They were symbols of authority, wealth, and prestige. Their names later immortalized in the epic poems that would shape Western literature for millennia. Understanding this backdrop is essential, because the stories of heroes like Achilles, Hector, and Helen did not occur in a vacuum. They were born in a world shaped by political ambition, strategic warfare, and the relentless pursuit of dominance. The stories that form the myth of the Trojan War likely began as oral traditions, passed from storyteller to storyteller long before Homer committed them to writing in the Iliad and the Odyssey. These myths reflect the values, fears, and aspirations of ancient societies, serving both as entertainment and moral instruction. One of the central narratives revolves around the figure of Helen, often described as the face that launched 1,000 ships. Helen, a figure of extraordinary beauty, was said to be abducted by Paris, Prince of Troy, which triggered a massive military expedition by the Greek kings to retrieve her. This act of abduction, whether literal or symbolic, can be interpreted as a reflection of political alliances, marriages, and rivalries among the kingdoms of the Aegean. Myths also elevated the deeds of warriors to legendary proportions. Achilles, whose rage and martial prowess defined the Iliad, and Hector, the noble defender of Troy, are more than historical figures. They embody ideals of heroism, honor, and the tragic cost of war. The gods played an active role in these stories, intervening directly in human affairs, punishing arrogance and rewarding valor. This interplay of divine and mortal action highlights a worldview in which human events were deeply entwined with cosmic forces. Even in the earliest tellings, the myths served as a cultural mirror, reflecting the human desire to understand suffering, courage, and the consequences of ambition. While modern historians separate myth from fact, it is impossible to fully appreciate the Trojan War without acknowledging how these stories shaped the way people remembered and interpreted their world. Through myths, Troy became more than a city. It became a symbol, a story of love, betrayal, and the relentless struggle for glory. For centuries, scholars debated whether Troy was real or merely a figment of poetic imagination. The Iliad provided vivid descriptions, but until the 19th century, no one could confirm the city's existence. Then, in the 1870s, Heinrich Schliemann, a wealthy German archaeologist driven by both passion and obsession, began excavations at a mound called Hizarlik in modern Turkey. What he discovered astonished the world. Layers upon layers of ancient settlements, each representing different periods of occupation, stretching back to the early Bronze Age. Schliemann identified what he believed to be the Troy of Homer, although later research showed that he had likely conflated different layers. Subsequent excavations by Wilhelm Dorpfeld and Carl Blegen refined the chronology, revealing at least 9 major phases of the city's development, from Troy I to Troy IX. Among these, Troy 6 and Troy 7 are considered the most likely candidates for the historical backdrop of the Trojan War, based on evidence of massive fortifications, destruction layers, and signs of violent conflict. Archaeological findings reveal that Troy was not just a mythical city of heroes. It was a bustling urban center, capable of sustaining large populations, trading with distant regions, and enduring repeated attacks. Artifacts such as pottery, tools, and remnants of palatial structures provide a tangible link to the past, bridging the gap between legend and history. The convergence of myth and archaeology allows historians to reconstruct not just the story of a war, but the complex society that made such a war conceivable. Troy was a city of ambition, trade, and power, and its eventual fall, whether entirely historical or partially mythologized, reflects universal themes of human conflict, resilience, and the enduring power of storytelling. In the centuries leading up to the legendary Trojan War, the Aegean world was a dynamic and complex region, full of political maneuvering, territorial disputes, and economic competition. Mycenaean Greece, with its powerful palatial centers such as Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, and Orchomenus, maintained dominance through a combination of military strength, alliances, and trade networks. These kingdoms were often ruled by warrior kings whose authority was both inherited and maintained through conquest. The distribution of resources, especially metals such as bronze and tin, played a crucial role in fueling both wealth and rivalry. Troy, strategically located on the western coast of Anatolia and near the Hellespont, controlled the passage between the Aegean and the Black Sea, which made it a focal point for maritime trade and a point of contention for kingdoms seeking dominance over trade routes. Economic competition was often a precursor to military conflict. For instance, control over shipping lanes, access to resources, and taxation of passing merchants could provoke tension between neighboring states. Scholars have argued that the myth of Helen's abduction may symbolize broader disputes over trade, alliances, or political marriages between powerful families. Furthermore, archaeological evidence shows that the Late Bronze Age was a period of widespread fortification construction, suggesting that warfare was a constant concern and that cities anticipated sieges and raids. Troy itself, especially in the layers identified as Troy 6 and 7, featured massive defensive walls over 20 feet thick, massive gates, and citadel towers capable of repelling sophisticated attacks. These fortifications indicate a society acutely aware of external threats, prepared to defend its wealth, and politically savvy in balancing alliances and rivalries. Thus, the Trojan War, as later mythologized, may have roots in very real geopolitical tensions, reflecting a world in which ambition, commerce, and power struggles intertwined in a delicate but often volatile balance. In the myths surrounding the Trojan War, personal relationships often serve as catalysts for conflict, yet beneath the legend lies a pattern recognizable to historians. Diplomacy, marriage alliances, and betrayals shaped the political landscape of the Late Bronze Age. Marriages were not merely private affairs. They were instruments of power, designed to forge alliances, secure loyalty, and consolidate territories. Helen, often depicted as the most beautiful woman in the world, may have been more than a symbol of romantic desire. Her story could reflect a real-world dispute over a politically significant marriage or the defection of an important ally to another kingdom. Similarly, Paris' choice to abduct or elope with Helen represents a narrative device highlighting the fragile nature of trust and the consequences of challenging social and political norms. Diplomatic networks among Mycenaean kingdoms were intricate. Kings frequently sent envoys to negotiate trade, marriages, and military alliances, while spies and informants ensured that no rival gained an advantage unnoticed. In such a network, betrayal could escalate quickly into full-scale warfare. The Greeks, according to myth, assembled an enormous coalition of city-states to launch a military expedition against Troy. While this may be exaggerated, it reflects the historical reality that collective military campaigns were sometimes organized against strategic or economic rivals. The narrative of heroes like Menelaus, Agamemnon, and Odysseus represents more than individual valor. It embodies the complex interplay of diplomacy, obligation, and vengeance. By interpreting these myths in the light of political and social structures, historians can see that what appears to be a personal or romantic dispute may actually mirror broader concerns over loyalty, succession, and control of resources in the Aegean world. While the Iliad begins in medias res, focusing on the rage of Achilles during the 10th year of the Trojan War, the origins of the conflict stretch back decades, shaped by incremental skirmishes, territorial disputes, and power plays. Archaeology and textual analysis suggest that the Late Bronze Age was a period marked by frequent raids and military excursions, both on land and at sea. The evidence of destruction layers in Troy, particularly in Troy VA, shows signs of fire, weapon damage, and sudden abandonment, suggesting a violent confrontation that aligns, in broad strokes, with the concept of a warlike siege. These early conflicts may have involved naval raids, punitive expeditions, and smaller-scale battles designed to test fortifications and intimidate rivals. In addition, the Mycenaean palaces show evidence of militarization, including fortified walls, weapon caches, and armor fragments, which reflects the preparedness of kingdoms to respond to external threats. Trade rivalries also contributed to the buildup of tension. Control of trade in metals, grain, and luxury goods could provoke skirmishes that escalated over time, culminating in larger conflicts. The myths of the Trojan War dramatize these events, casting heroes as central figures, but beneath the surface, It is likely that the war grew out of a series of economic, political, and strategic disputes rather than a single act of passion or betrayal. By understanding these roots, historians can appreciate that the Trojan War, while immortalized in epic poetry, was a plausible outcome of the pressures, ambitions, and anxieties inherent in a competitive late Bronze Age world. The seeds of the legendary 10-year siege were sown in the everyday dynamics of power, wealth, and influence, long before the heroes and gods entered the stage. Achilles, the central figure of Homer's Iliad, is often remembered as the quintessential hero, unmatched in strength, skill, and fury, but also as a profoundly human character, driven by pride, emotion, and the inexorable pull of fate. Born to the sea goddess Thetis and the mortal king Peleus, Achilles' semi-divine nature endowed him with extraordinary prowess in battle, yet it also marked him for a tragic destiny. His heel, the only vulnerable part of his body, symbolizes the fragile line between mortality and immortality, emphasizing the inescapable human vulnerability that even the greatest warriors cannot evade. In the Iliad, the conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon over honor and respect illustrates the cultural significance of time, the Greek concept of honor, reputation, and social standing. Agamemnon's decision to claim Briseis, a captive woman awarded to Achilles as a prize of war, triggers Achilles' withdrawal from battle, demonstrating that even legendary heroes are not immune to personal pride and societal expectations. Achilles' rage, however, is not merely an emotional outburst. It is an exploration of the human psyche and the consequences of unchecked anger. When Hector kills Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, the hero's grief and vengeance propel him back into combat with single-minded intensity. His killing of Hector, while a climactic act of war, also represents the cyclical nature of violence, honor, and retribution that defines the Iliad. From a historical perspective, the tales of Achilles reflect the values of Mycenaean warrior culture, where martial skill, loyalty, and glory were paramount. While there is no direct evidence that Achilles existed as a real individual, the characteristics attributed to him, bravery, skill, and the pursuit of eternal fame, resonate with what we know of the heroic ethos of the late Bronze Age. Through Achilles, Homer and subsequent storytellers immortalize the interplay of human strength and human frailty, making him not just a warrior, but a symbol of the heroic ideal itself. Across the battlefield from Achilles stood Hector, the prince of Troy and the city's most formidable defender. Unlike Achilles, whose motivations are often personal, Hector represents civic duty, familial responsibility, and the tragic weight of defending one's homeland. As the eldest son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, Hector is bound not only by loyalty to Troy, but also by the moral imperative to protect his family, city, and people from the invading Greek coalition. The Iliad portrays Hector as a paragon of virtue and valor, skilled in combat, wise in strategy, and deeply aware of the consequences of war. One of the most poignant moments in the epic occurs when Hector bids farewell to his wife Andromache and their infant son, Astyanax. This scene humanizes the hero, illustrating that behind the armor and spear is a man who fears for the future of his loved ones, yet remains committed to his duty. Hector's struggle is emblematic of the tragic nature of war, an honorable figure caught in a conflict larger than himself, ultimately doomed by forces beyond human control. Archaeologically, Troy VA, with its signs of fortification repair, burned structures, and hurried construction, suggests that the city endured prolonged periods of siege and defense. While Hector may not have been a historical figure, his character encapsulates the experience of defenders in fortified Bronze Age cities, tasked with protecting families, property, and the very survival of their communities. His eventual death at the hands of Achilles is both a literary climax and a reflection of the brutal realities of ancient warfare, where courage, skill, and leadership were constantly tested, and mortality was unavoidable. In essence, Hector's heroism is rooted not just in martial ability, but in his moral and emotional integrity, representing a universal ideal of honor and responsibility that continues to resonate across cultures and eras. While Achilles and Hector dominate the narrative of the Iliad, the epic also introduces a wide cast of heroes whose actions, choices, and fates intertwine to create a complex tapestry of war, honor, and human emotion. Among the Greeks, Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, Ajax, and Diomedes each play vital roles, reflecting different facets of heroism and leadership. Agamemnon, as the commander of the Greek forces, embodies authority and political ambition, but his arrogance often leads to tension and conflict with his fellow leaders. Menelaus, whose wife Helen's abduction is the ostensible cause of the war, represents personal grievance and the intertwining of private and political motives. Odysseus, the wily strategist, exemplifies intelligence, cunning, and adaptability, traits just as valuable as physical strength in the brutal theater of war. Among the Trojans, Aeneas, later immortalized by Virgil in the Aeneid, represents endurance, piety, and the continuity of civilization, linking Troy's legacy to future generations. These heroes are more than individual personalities. They symbolize the spectrum of human experience in war: courage and cowardice, loyalty and betrayal, honor and revenge. Each confronts choices that test character, morality, and the limits of human endurance. In historical terms, these narratives likely mirror the experiences of leaders and warriors in the late Bronze Age, men whose lives were defined by both battlefield exploits and the intricate politics of their time. While archaeology cannot confirm individual exploits, it reveals the culture of militarized societies, the prominence of fortifications, and the prevalence of weapons and armor, all of which support the plausibility of sustained, complex warfare as depicted in Homer. Through this ensemble of characters, the Iliad not only narrates a story of individual valor, but also presents a study of human society under the pressures of conflict, where personal ambition, civic duty, and divine influence collide in dramatic and enduring ways. The story of Helen's abduction is arguably the most famous catalyst of the Trojan War, immortalized in Homer's Iliad and other epic traditions. Helen, often described as the most beautiful woman in the world, was the daughter of Zeus and Leda, making her semi-divine in origin and setting her apart as a figure of both human allure and divine intrigue. According to myth, Helen was initially married to Menelaus, king of Sparta, forming an alliance that secured political and territorial stability in the region. However, during a visit to Sparta, Paris, Prince of Troy, either abducted or was welcomed by Helen to Troy, a detail that varies across sources, igniting a chain reaction that would ultimately plunge the Aegean world into a decade-long conflict. While Homer portrays this as a deeply personal grievance, Menelaus' honor affronted by the loss of his wife, the underlying causes likely reflect political and economic motivations as well. Marriages in the late Bronze Age were instruments of diplomacy, often cementing alliances between powerful houses or kingdoms. Helen's departure from Sparta to Troy could symbolize a shift in these alliances, reflecting a perceived betrayal of trust or a realignment of power in the Aegean and Anatolian worlds. The abduction also provided a narrative device for later generations to dramatize the consequences of desire, pride, and revenge. Scholars suggest that stories like Helen's were likely embellishments layered onto historical conflicts, transforming what may have been a regional war over trade routes, wealth, or influence into a tale of personal passion, divine intervention, and heroic courage. In essence, Helen becomes both a literal and symbolic figure, the trigger of war, the embodiment of beauty and desire, and a human catalyst for the clash of civilizations that would define an era. Following Helen's departure to Troy, the Greek world mobilized an unprecedented coalition of city-states and kings, united under the leadership of Agamemnon, king of Mycenae. This coalition illustrates not only the scale of the conflict, but also the political and logistical sophistication of the late Bronze Age. Greek city-states were largely autonomous, each ruled by its own king, yet the myth depicts a system in which loyalty and obligation could be invoked to assemble a massive expeditionary force. Key figures such as Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, Ajax, the towering warrior of Salamis, and Nestor, the wise and seasoned king of Pylos, brought their own contingents, each with unique fighting styles, strategies, and personal motivations. Organizing such a force would have been an extraordinary feat in reality, requiring careful planning, resource allocation, and coordination of supply lines. Archaeological evidence suggests that Mycenaean palaces and administrative centers maintained inventories of weapons, ships, and provisions, indicating that the logistics of warfare were understood and managed systematically. The journey from Greece to Troy, whether a literal maritime expedition or an amalgamation of multiple campaigns, underscores the strategic importance of controlling access to trade routes, harbors, and coastal regions. Each contingent of Greek forces likely had its own internal dynamics, rivalries, and hierarchies, reflecting the human complexity behind the epic narrative. The Iliad emphasizes personal valor and divine favor, but beneath the myth lies a portrait of a coalition war, a conflict driven by political ambition, economic interests, and the desire to assert dominance over a rival city. The assembly of the Greek army therefore represents both the power of collective action and the challenges inherent in uniting diverse leaders under a common cause, illustrating the interplay between ambition, loyalty, and the pressures of impending war. The voyage to Troy is one of the most enduring aspects of the Trojan War narrative, a perilous journey across the Aegean that tests not only the courage and skill of the warriors, but also their resilience, leadership, and endurance. Ancient texts depict storms, divine interventions, and logistical challenges, emphasizing the unpredictability and danger of long maritime campaigns. While these embellishments are mythological, they reflect real concerns faced by seafaring civilizations during the late Bronze Age. Transporting thousands of troops, animals, and supplies over long distances required careful planning and intimate knowledge of the sea, prevailing winds, and currents. Ships had to be provisioned with food, water, and weaponry, while commanders needed to maintain discipline and morale among men who would face not only enemy forces, but also exhaustion, disease, and natural hazards. The crossing also symbolically represents a point of no return. Once the Greeks reached Troy, retreat was not an option, and the conflict became inevitable. Archaeological studies of coastal settlements and shipwrecks in the Aegean indicate that Bronze Age societies possessed advanced shipbuilding technology capable of supporting such expeditions. Moreover, controlling ports and harbors along the route would have been essential to resupply and communication, highlighting the strategic dimension of the campaign beyond the battlefield. In literary terms, the journey sets the stage for the epic narrative, introducing themes of heroism, fate, and divine involvement. It underscores the transformation of ordinary men into legendary figures, whose actions and decisions shape the course of history, or mythic history. By understanding the practical and symbolic aspects of the Greek expedition, historians can see the Trojan War not merely as a tale of love and vengeance, but as a reflection of the logistical, political, and social realities of a civilization capable of waging complex, long-distance warfare. As the Greek forces approached the walls of Troy, the first clashes set the tone for what would become a prolonged and grueling conflict. Homer's Iliad begins in the 10th year of the war, but earlier encounters are hinted at, representing a series of probing attacks, raids, and tactical maneuvers designed to test the city's fortifications and the resolve of its defenders. Archaeological evidence supports the likelihood of such encounters. Troy VA, widely associated with the historical counterpart of Homer's Troy, shows signs of repeated assaults, including layers of destruction, arrowheads embedded in walls, and burnt structures that suggest sustained conflict. The Greek strategy likely involved both direct assaults on the city's outer defenses and attempts to cut off supply lines to weaken the inhabitants gradually. Trojans, led by Hector, mounted their own defensive measures, repairing walls, fortifying gates, and organizing sorties to disrupt enemy operations. The psychological impact of these early skirmishes was significant, shaping morale on both sides. For the Greeks, initial successes and setbacks tested leadership and cohesion among the diverse coalition of forces, while for the Trojans, defending their city instilled a sense of communal identity, heroism, and resistance against overwhelming odds. The Iliad dramatizes these encounters, highlighting individual acts of valor, divine interventions, and personal rivalries, but beneath the narrative lies a realistic depiction of protracted siege warfare, a combination of tactical ingenuity, endurance, and strategic planning. These early battles were not merely preludes to the legendary duels of Achilles and Hector. They represent the lived experience of Bronze Age warfare, where every arrow, every sally, and every repair of a wall could shift the momentum of a siege. Despite the inevitability of prolonged conflict, the myths hint at attempts at diplomacy before full-scale hostilities erupted. In Homeric accounts and other sources, envoys are dispatched between the Greeks and Trojans, calling for negotiations, restitution, or the return of Helen to avoid bloodshed. Menelaus himself, in some versions of the tale, attempts to settle the dispute peacefully before resorting to war, reflecting the importance of mediation, honor, and social norms in ancient societies. This focus on negotiation mirrors historical practices of the late Bronze Age, where city-states often engaged in treaties, marital alliances, and tributes to avoid protracted conflict. Such diplomacy was not merely ceremonial. It had tangible consequences for trade, security, and political stability. The Greeks' insistence on Helen's return can be interpreted as a justification for asserting military dominance, while the Trojans' refusal may reflect a desire to protect sovereignty, honor, and strategic interests. Envoys played critical roles in maintaining communication, representing the authority of kings and enforcing social expectations. The failure of diplomacy in the myths underscores a broader reality. While negotiation could sometimes prevent conflict, deep-rooted rivalries, competition for resources, and the stakes of honor often rendered war inevitable. The Iliad captures this tension vividly, portraying emissaries such as Priam's envoys and the Greek heralds as intermediaries who operate in a delicate space between diplomacy and coercion. Their presence illustrates the human capacity for negotiation, even in the shadow of inevitable violence, and provides insight into how ancient societies balanced the pursuit of justice, honor, and political objectives without immediately resorting to total war. Understanding the geography of Troy is essential to grasping both the mythic and historical dimensions of the siege. Troy's location on the western coast of Anatolia gave it immense strategic significance, controlling access to the Hellespont, the Aegean, and trade routes extending into the Black Sea. The city was built on a natural elevation, a mound called Hizarlik, which allowed defenders to observe enemy movements and provided a strong defensive advantage. Archaeological excavations reveal that Troy's fortifications included massive stone walls, citadels, and carefully planned gates, designed to withstand sustained assault. These features indicate that the city's planners were not only skilled builders, but also astute military strategists. Surrounding the city, fertile plains allowed for the cultivation of grain, vineyards, and livestock, supporting a population capable of enduring sieges for extended periods. The proximity of rivers and access to the sea provided water, trade, and potential avenues for supply, although these were vulnerable to blockade. For the Greeks, the challenge was immense, breaching formidable walls while maintaining supply lines, managing a diverse coalition, and navigating terrain that favored the defenders. The myths dramatize these challenges, highlighting heroic duels at the gates and the significance of city walls as both physical and symbolic barriers. Yet the historical reality is equally compelling. Troy's geography, combined with its fortifications, made it a resilient city-state, capable of withstanding repeated attempts at conquest. The interplay between terrain, architecture, and military strategy is crucial to understanding how the war could drag on for a decade, blending the tactical realities of Bronze Age warfare with the enduring legend of heroism, honor, and the tragic consequences of prolonged conflict. As the Greek forces besieged Troy, much of the Iliad focuses on individual duels, which were both symbolic and practical. These duels reflected the martial culture of the Mycenaean world, where personal valor, skill with weapons, and courage in battle determined social status and military hierarchy. The duel between Paris and Menelaus is a prime example. Paris, the Trojan prince whose actions sparked the war, faces Menelaus, the Spartan king whose wife Helen's abduction caused the Greek coalition to assemble. Homer portrays this duel as a clash not only of strength, but also of honor, with the outcome potentially determining the fate of nations. In the narrative, the duel is interrupted by divine intervention, illustrating a key theme. Human actions alone could not dictate outcomes when gods were involved. These duels also served as a way to preserve morale, maintain discipline, and showcase the elite warrior's prowess in a context where large-scale battles could become chaotic and deadly. Other duels, such as those between Hector and Ajax or Diomedes and Aeneas, emphasize strategic skill, courage under fire, and the hero's ability to inspire troops. In historical terms, while we cannot verify the exact events of these duels, the archaeological records suggest that Bronze Age warriors trained extensively in spear and sword combat, with specialized armor and weapons designed for both individual and collective engagements. The duels thus reflect both mythic dramatization and the martial realities of the time, symbolizing the tension between personal honor and the broader strategic objectives of the siege. One of the most distinctive features of the Iliad is the active role of the gods, whose interventions shape the course of events and the fates of heroes. Zeus, Athena, Apollo, Hera, and other deities frequently intervene, protecting favored warriors, influencing decisions, and even directly altering battles. This divine involvement mirrors the ancient Greek worldview, in which human events were believed to be entwined with cosmic forces. For instance, Apollo supports the Trojans by sending plagues or striking Greek warriors with his arrows, while Athena aids the Greeks by granting strategic insights or enhancing combat abilities. These interventions often escalate conflict, turning routine skirmishes into high-stakes confrontations and demonstrating that heroism alone could not guarantee success. The presence of gods also functions narratively to explain reversals of fortune, maintain dramatic tension, and emphasize moral lessons about pride, obedience, and humility. In historical perspective, the attribution of events to divine forces reflects a society deeply connected to religion and ritual, where military victories, defeats, and natural occurrences were interpreted as signs of divine favor or wrath. The Iliad thus blends martial history with theological worldview, illustrating how ancient Greeks understood the interplay of human agency and fate. The gods' involvement underscores the unpredictability of war, reminding both characters and audiences that even the greatest skill and courage are subject to forces beyond human control. In essence, divine intervention dramatizes the stakes of conflict, elevates human struggle to epic proportions, and reflects the cultural and spiritual framework of the Mycenaean and later Greek world. As the conflict dragged on, the siege of Troy evolved into a prolonged war of attrition, testing the endurance, strategy, and psychological resilience of both sides. Homer describes large-scale confrontations, night raids, and exchanges of prisoners, illustrating a protracted struggle that consumed resources and morale. From a historical standpoint, prolonged sieges required careful planning, stockpiling food and water, reinforcing fortifications, managing troop rotations, and maintaining the loyalty and motivation of warriors over extended periods. Troy's defenders, aware of their city's strengths, used these advantages to conduct sorties, ambushes, and defensive maneuvers that prolonged the conflict. The Greeks, despite numerical superiority, faced logistical challenges, disease, and fatigue, which eroded their effectiveness over time. Psychological factors also played a crucial role. Fear, grief, and anger influenced the decisions of warriors and commanders, shaping the timing and intensity of attacks. For instance, the death of Patroclus at Hector's hand spurred Achilles to return to battle with unparalleled fury, demonstrating how emotion could directly impact military strategy. Similarly, Hector's defense of Troy is motivated not only by tactical necessity, but by the desire to protect families, homes, and communal identity. Archaeology confirms that Bronze Age cities like Troy were built to endure sieges, with complex gate systems, fortified citadels, and supplies that allowed inhabitants to withstand prolonged assaults. The escalation of the siege, therefore, reflects both mythic dramatization and plausible historical circumstances, a war in which strategy, heroism, endurance, and psychological factors determine survival and success. In this sense, the Iliad captures the essence of Bronze Age siege warfare, while simultaneously elevating it to the level of epic literature, intertwining human, divine, and symbolic dimensions in a narrative that has captivated audiences for millennia. Among the Greek warriors, Patroclus stands as one of the most poignant figures, embodying loyalty, friendship, and the human cost of war. A close companion of Achilles, Patroclus is not merely a secondary character, but a moral and emotional fulcrum around which the events of the Iliad pivot. The Greek forces, demoralized by the absence of Achilles due to his quarrel with Agamemnon over honor, struggled to hold the front lines against the increasingly confident Trojan army. Recognizing the urgent need to protect the ships and inspire his comrades, Patroclus dons Achilles' armor and leads the Myrmidons into battle. This act of bravery, though heroic, is laden with fatal consequences. Patroclus fights with exceptional valor, striking fear into the Trojans and demonstrating that courage can shift the tide of battle, at least temporarily. Yet, he eventually confronts Hector in direct combat, and despite his skill and determination, Patroclus falls, killed by the Trojan prince. His death reverberates far beyond the immediate loss of life. For Achilles, the event triggers a seismic emotional response, transforming grief into a singular, unstoppable desire for vengeance. The Iliad portrays Patroclus' death as a turning point, emphasizing themes of loyalty, the bonds between warriors, and the tragic inevitability of mortality in a world dominated by conflict and divine influence. From a historical perspective, the narrative reflects the intense personal stakes inherent in Bronze Age warfare, where the loss of a single warrior could inspire dramatic shifts in morale, leadership, and military action. Patroclus' role underscores the human dimensions of war, the interplay of bravery, sacrifice, friendship, and the consequences of ambition and pride that transcend the battlefield. Driven by grief and rage, Achilles re-enters the war with a singular focus: the destruction of Hector and the defense of Greek honor. His return is one of the most dramatic sequences in the Iliad, blending martial prowess, emotional intensity, and divine intervention. Achilles' actions after Patroclus' death exemplify the heroic code of the time. Personal honor, loyalty to comrades, and the pursuit of eternal glory take precedence over mere survival. He arms himself with new armor forged by the god Hephaestus, a symbol of divine favor and extraordinary martial capability, underscoring the fusion of human and supernatural forces in epic storytelling. Achilles' re-entry into the battlefield transforms the dynamics of the siege. Trojan forces, who had grown confident in his absence, are thrown into disarray by the sudden return of one of the most formidable warriors in Greek mythology. Homer details numerous encounters in which Achilles displays unparalleled skill, ruthlessly pursuing Hector while overwhelming all opponents in his path. This period of the war illustrates the psychological impact of a single, dominant hero, both inspiring allies and terrifying enemies. Thematically, Achilles' rage, or menes, is central to the Iliad's exploration of human emotion, morality, and the consequences of unchecked fury. Historically, the depiction of such individual heroism likely reflects the values of Mycenaean warrior culture, where personal valor could influence the outcome of battles, inspire troops, and secure prestige, even amid broader coalition warfare. Achilles' return also emphasizes the cyclical nature of vengeance, the interdependence of relationships, and the moral and emotional dimensions of leadership in the context of protracted, high-stakes conflict. Hector's death at the hands of Achilles represents both a narrative climax and a profound human tragedy. The duel between Achilles and Hector, described in rich detail by Homer, is more than a simple confrontation of strength. It encapsulates the clash of values, honor, and the inexorable consequences of war. Hector, the noble defender of Troy, fights not only for personal glory, but for the survival of his city, his family, and his people. His demise signals a turning point in the siege, both strategically and emotionally, demonstrating the devastating impact of hero-centered warfare. Achilles, in a display of anger and grief, drags Hector's body around the walls of Troy, an act that underscores the intensity of personal vengeance and the cultural significance of honor and shame. This treatment of Hector's corpse is more than narrative drama. It reflects ancient notions of respect, vengeance, and the social consequences of death in combat. For the Trojans, Hector's loss is catastrophic, affecting morale, leadership, and the defense of the city. Archaeologically, the evidence of Troy VA, including signs of destruction, hastily constructed fortifications, and burned buildings, mirrors the historical plausibility of a siege marked by key losses among leaders and defenders. Moreover, Hector's death reinforces themes of inevitability, fate, and human limitation in the Iliad. Even the bravest and noblest warriors are subject to mortality and forces beyond their control. In literary and historical terms, this episode illustrates how individual heroism, emotional intensity, and social structures intertwined in Bronze Age warfare, shaping the course of events in ways that resonate both in myth and, plausibly, in historical reality. The fall of Hector marks a profound narrative and strategic turning point, signaling the approaching end of Troy's heroic defense and the escalation of Greek dominance in the siege. Hector's death reverberates throughout Troy, affecting the city's morale, military structure, and collective psyche. Homer portrays the deep mourning of Hector's family, particularly his wife, Andromache, and their young son, Astyanax. Andromache's grief is both personal and symbolic, representing the larger suffering of Trojan civilians caught in a war they did not start. Her laments highlight the emotional cost of heroic culture, where individual valor often comes at the expense of family and community. The Trojans, while still facing the Greek forces, are forced to reckon with the loss of their primary defender, creating a vacuum in leadership and a profound psychological strain. Civic rituals of mourning, likely based on historical practices, reinforced social cohesion even in times of catastrophic loss. Priam, Hector's father and king of Troy, emerges as a figure of moral authority, balancing grief with the responsibility of sustaining his people under siege. The city's defenders are inspired both by fear and a renewed sense of duty. They must honor Hector's sacrifice by continuing to resist, despite the looming threat of Greek dominance. This period underscores the human dimension of war, the interplay between heroism and vulnerability, courage and grief, collective duty and personal loss. From an archaeological standpoint, signs of hurried construction, reinforced gates, and hurriedly fortified structures in Troy, VA suggest that the city's inhabitants, much like the characters in Homer, had to endure rapid adaptation under extreme stress, reflecting a reality in which survival depended on both resilience and strategic improvisation. In one of the most memorable episodes of the Iliad, King Priam undertakes a perilous journey to the Greek camp to plead for the return of Hector's body. This act of diplomacy highlights the intersection of courage, humility, and humanity amidst the brutality of war. Priam's approach is carefully measured. He appeals to the shared values of honor, grief, and familial bonds, reminding Achilles that he himself is a father who knows the pain of loss. The encounter humanizes both the king and the warrior, emphasizing the possibility of compassion even in a time dominated by violence. In historical terms, the episode may reflect practices of negotiation, ransom, and the treatment of enemy combatants in the late Bronze Age. Returning a fallen warrior's body for proper burial was a sign of respect and recognition of social and cultural norms, reinforcing the concept that warfare was not only about conquest, but also about maintaining social and religious codes. Priam's diplomacy also functions strategically. By appealing to Achilles' humanity, he secures Hector's body without further bloodshed, preserving the morale and dignity of Troy in a time of extreme vulnerability. The narrative underscores the importance of psychological and cultural intelligence in leadership, illustrating that the outcomes of war were influenced not only by brute force, but also by negotiation, empathy, and understanding of shared human values. This blend of heroism, humility, and practical strategy demonstrates the complexity of leadership during protracted conflicts, a reality that resonates across both myth and historical reconstruction. Hector's death and Priam's negotiation mark a critical moment in the cultural and psychological landscape of Troy. The loss of the city's champion creates an acute awareness of mortality, vulnerability, and the limitations of even the most heroic individuals. For the Trojans, this period tests resilience, communal solidarity, and the city's ability to endure under siege. Homer emphasizes the human cost of war. Families grieve, communities struggle to maintain morale, and soldiers wrestle with fear, anger, and exhaustion. Psychologically, the city is transformed, facing the dual burden of mourning and survival. From a historical perspective, such stress would have tangible effects. Population displacement, resource scarcity, and the constant threat of attack would force civilians and defenders alike to adapt quickly, develop strategies for preservation, and make difficult moral and practical choices. Culturally, the episode reflects Bronze Age values regarding honor, loyalty, and respect for the dead, highlighting the deep interconnection between societal norms and individual actions. The rituals surrounding mourning, the respectful treatment of Hector's body, and the recognition of heroism within communal memory serve to reinforce social cohesion even amidst devastating loss. This interplay of grief, strategy, and cultural adherence illustrates a fundamental aspect of human societies at war: the ability to preserve identity, values, and morale under the extreme pressures of prolonged conflict. In essence, Troy's response to Hector's death demonstrates the delicate balance between heroism, human vulnerability, and the enduring need for diplomacy and ethical action, a theme that resonates across both myth and historical understanding. As the siege of Troy dragged into its later years, the cohesion and effectiveness of the Greek forces were constantly tested. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and commander of the Greek coalition, faced the formidable challenge of maintaining unity among a diverse assembly of city-states, each led by kings of varying temperaments, ambitions, and agendas. Leaders like Odysseus, Nestor, Ajax, and Diomedes contributed both military strength and strategic counsel. Yet they were also rivals, their personal honor and political ambitions sometimes creating tension and discord within the coalition. The Iliad portrays Agamemnon as a figure whose authority is occasionally undermined by his own pride and the conflicting interests of his allies, demonstrating the fragile balance required to lead a coalition army. Historically, coordinating multiple contingents would have been a logistical nightmare. Managing supplies, distributing wealth, maintaining troop morale, and ensuring effective communication over an extended siege required remarkable organizational skill. The Greek coalition relied on established networks of loyalty and obligation, in which personal oaths and the promise of reward reinforced participation. Despite these mechanisms, the prolonged nature of the siege likely strained relations among commanders, with the Iliad dramatizing these tensions through quarrels, debates, and challenges to authority. The depiction of coalition leadership in the Iliad, while stylized, reflects plausible social and military realities. A protracted war demanded not only martial prowess, but also diplomacy, negotiation, and the careful balancing of competing egos and ambitions to achieve common objectives. The later stages of the Trojan War, as depicted in the Iliad, involve a series of large-scale battles, raids, and duels that demonstrate both tactical ingenuity and the centrality of individual heroism. Greek and Trojan forces engage in complex maneuvers, utilizing chariots, archers, and infantry to gain positional advantage, while fortifications, trenches, and walls influence the flow of combat. Key confrontations, such as the duels between Hector and Ajax or the exploits of Diomedes under Athena's guidance, showcase the interplay between strategy, skill, and divine intervention. The use of chariots, common in the late Bronze Age, allowed warriors to traverse the battlefield quickly, deliver rapid attacks, and retreat efficiently, highlighting the importance of mobility and coordination. Archers and slingers provided range support, while heavily armored infantry engaged in close combat. Tactical innovation was critical. Commanders had to anticipate enemy movements, exploit weaknesses in defenses, and maintain cohesion among diverse units. These battles, while dramatized in epic poetry, likely mirror historical practices, where strategy and adaptation determine survival as much as raw courage. Moreover, Homer's emphasis on individual heroism, achieved through acts of extraordinary valor, clever tactics, or divine favor, underscores the cultural value placed on personal reputation and glory. The combination of individual exploits and broader military strategy demonstrates the complexity of Bronze Age warfare, where human skill, leadership, and resourcefulness intersected with cultural norms, social expectations, and the unpredictable influence of events beyond human control. As the siege extended over years, both Greek and Trojan forces faced not only physical challenges, but profound psychological strain. Prolonged exposure to danger, scarcity of resources, and the constant threat of death produced fatigue, anxiety, and fluctuating morale. Homer vividly illustrates the mental toll on warriors. Fear, grief, rage, and despair shape behavior as much as strategy or divine favor. Trojans, confronting the loss of key leaders such as Hector, grapple with the demoralizing realization that even their greatest defenders cannot secure victory indefinitely. Greek soldiers, meanwhile, struggle with exhaustion, homesickness, and the pressures of coalition dynamics, where interpersonal conflicts and leadership disputes threaten cohesion. Psychological warfare, including displays of heroism, threats, and intimidation, became an essential component of the siege. The Greeks often sought to demoralize the Trojans through aggressive attacks, while the Trojans relied on heroic displays and strategic defense to sustain morale. Archaeological evidence of Troy VA indicates that prolonged sieges involve careful management of food, water, and defensive structures, highlighting the tangible realities behind the literary dramatizations of endurance and suffering. The psychological dimension of war, emphasized in the Iliad, reflects a sophisticated understanding of human behavior under extreme stress, illustrating how courage, fear, and emotional resilience influence the course of protracted conflict. This interplay of mental strain, tactical pressure, and heroic action contributes to a comprehensive understanding of the siege, blending mythic narrative with historical plausibility and offering insight into the human experience of ancient warfare. After the devastating death of Patroclus, Achilles' rage reaches its apex, transforming the Greek forces' morale and strategy. Homer emphasizes that Achilles is not merely a warrior. He is an embodiment of unstoppable force, whose anger and skill on the battlefield become the pivot around which the war turns. Once he re-enters the fray, the balance shifts dramatically. Trojan forces, which had previously gained momentum in his absence, find themselves facing a nearly invincible adversary. Achilles' armor, newly forged by Hephaestus, is symbolic not only of divine favor, but also of the integration of supernatural and human dimensions in war. Each strike, each maneuver, is described with hyperbolic detail, demonstrating the cultural importance placed on skill, honor, and reputation. The Iliad's narrative emphasizes that Achilles fights not merely for victory, but to avenge Patroclus and assert his own glory, demonstrating the close interplay between personal motivation and broader military consequences. Historically, the depiction of a single warrior influencing the outcomes of large-scale engagements may seem exaggerated, but it reflects the importance of elite warriors in Bronze Age warfare. Leaders and highly skilled combatants often had disproportionate influence on the battlefield, inspiring allies and instilling fear in enemies. Achilles' return exemplifies this effect, where a single individual's capabilities and reputation can alter morale, strategy, and the perception of invincibility, providing insight into how ancient societies understood the dynamics of heroism, leadership, and psychological influence in war. With Achilles active, the battlefield becomes a theater of near-constant carnage. Homer details numerous clashes in which Greek forces gain renewed momentum, forcing Trojans to retreat behind city walls and fortifications. The hero's singular combat skills are complemented by strategic use of the Myrmidons, a loyal contingent that follows him with disciplined precision. Achilles' movements create chaos among Trojan ranks, breaking formations and undermining morale. The Iliad narrates specific episodes of extraordinary violence, from Hector's relentless pursuit and eventual death to the symbolic dragging of Hector's body, underscoring both the personal and collective dimensions of warfare. Historically, such concentrated acts of aggression reflect plausible tactics of elite warriors and focused strikes designed to demoralize an enemy. The psychological impact of a dominating combatant on opposing forces cannot be understated. Morale is as critical as weaponry in prolonged engagements. The death toll, destruction of defensive positions, and loss of key leaders forced the Trojans into a defensive posture, gradually constricting their ability to launch effective counterattacks. Meanwhile, the Greeks consolidate gains, repair internal cohesion, and prepare for further operations. This stage of the war demonstrates the interplay between individual heroism, strategic initiative, and the cumulative effects of attritional conflict. It also highlights a fundamental feature of ancient warfare: the devastating influence of both psychological and physical dominance on prolonged campaigns, shaping not only outcomes, but the perception of inevitability for both attackers and defenders. As Achilles' fury dominates the battlefield, Troy approaches a tipping point, a precarious balance between survival and total destruction. The city's fortifications, though formidable, are strained by continuous assault, and the psychological resilience of its defenders is tested to the extreme. Citizens and soldiers alike are confronted with the looming threat of annihilation, forcing rapid adaptation, resource management, and moral reckoning. Homer emphasizes the human dimension of this crisis. Families fear for their lives, warriors struggle with fear and courage, and leaders like Priam must maintain authority while navigating the tension between grief and practical necessity. The stakes are elevated not only by military pressure, but by cultural imperatives. Honor, loyalty, and reputation demand that defenders fight to the utmost, even in the face of near-certain defeat. Archaeological evidence from Troy VIA supports the plausibility of sustained sieges. Fortifications show repair and reinforcement, while evidence of burned layers, abandoned structures, and defensive trenches suggest desperate measures to protect both population and city infrastructure. This near-collapse stage illustrates how prolonged conflict impacts both material and psychological structures of a city-state, emphasizing the interplay of leadership, morale, and strategy in determining survival. For the Greeks, the successes achieved under Achilles' command further validate the importance of elite leadership and coordinated assaults in protracted warfare. In literary terms, the heightened stakes reinforce themes central to the Iliad: the interplay of human emotion, heroic prowess, and divine influence in determining the fate of both individuals and entire societies. The death of Patroclus is not only a turning point in the war, but also an opportunity to explore the profound cultural importance of funerary rites in the ancient world. Homer devotes extensive attention to the preparation, cremation, and mourning rituals associated with Patroclus' body, illustrating both the spiritual and social dimensions of death. In Greek culture, proper burial was considered essential for the soul's peaceful transition to the afterlife. Failing to honor the dead could invite divine retribution or haunt the living, reinforcing the moral imperative of ritualized funerals. The Iliad describes the preparation of Patroclus' body with meticulous attention, cleansing, anointing with oils, and dressing in armor befitting a hero. The funeral pyre is constructed with symbolic elements, such as offerings of precious items and weapons, reflecting both personal respect and societal norms surrounding honor and remembrance. This ceremony functions on multiple levels. It provides closure for grieving comrades, reinforces social cohesion among the Greeks, and publicly affirms the heroic identity of Patroclus, ensuring that his valor is remembered and celebrated. Historically, such rituals were integral to late Bronze Age societies, reflecting a deep understanding of the psychological, spiritual, and communal needs of a society under prolonged stress. Archaeological evidence from Mycenaean sites, including grave goods and elaborate burials, supports the notion that warriors were commemorated with attention to both material display and ritual significance. The funeral of Patroclus, thus, serves as a bridge between personal grief, societal obligation, and narrative drama, highlighting the interplay of emotion, morality, and culture in the context of heroic warfare. Following the funeral of Patroclus, Achilles' anger intensifies, shaping both his personal trajectory and the broader conduct of the war. His wrath, menes, is a central theme in the Iliad, driving him to acts of extraordinary violence and influencing the morale of both Greeks and Trojans. Homer describes Achilles' return to the battlefield as a psychological transformation. Grief, rage, and a desire for vengeance combine to create a nearly unstoppable force whose actions alter the strategic and emotional landscape of the conflict. Beyond physical prowess, Achilles' psychological state demonstrates how personal emotion can shape historical or mythic events. His fury motivates extreme measures, such as the desecration of Hector's body, which, while shocking to modern sensibilities, reflects the ancient interconnection of honor, vengeance, and social norms. Achilles' behavior also underscores the interplay between emotion and leadership. His wrath galvanizes the Greek army, inspiring courage and amplifying their effectiveness, while simultaneously instilling fear and despair among the Trojans. Historically, these dynamics reflect a plausible understanding of morale, heroism, and individual influence in Bronze Age warfare. Elite warriors, particularly those with renowned reputations, could have disproportionate psychological and strategic effects, influencing both allies and adversaries. Homer's focus on Achilles' inner turmoil and outward violence highlights the complex human dimensions of war, the ways in which grief, loyalty, ambition, and rage can intertwine, shaping both individual destiny and the fate of entire armies. The culmination of Achilles' wrath and Patroclus' death sets the stage for the climactic confrontation with Hector, a duel that encapsulates the thematic and narrative essence of the Iliad. Both warriors, emblematic of their respective cultures, prepare with ritual, strategy, and psychological focus. Hector, aware of his role as Troy's primary defender, fortifies both his mental resolve and tactical approach, understanding that the duel is more than a contest of arms. It is a symbolic clash of honor, city, and fate. Achilles, conversely, approaches with the overwhelming momentum of grief-fueled vengeance, guided both by divine intervention and human skill. Homer dramatizes the preparation with vivid imagery, armor gleaming, chariots poised, gods taking sides, and warriors understanding that this confrontation could determine the broader trajectory of the war. The duel represents the ultimate intersection of human capability, cultural expectation, and divine influence. From a historical perspective, such climactic confrontations, while idealized in epic narrative, reflect plausible Bronze Age practices. Champions often engaged in ritualized combat to resolve disputes or to influence broader strategic outcomes, providing focal points of morale and psychological dominance. The anticipation, preparation, and execution of the duel underscore the multidimensional nature of warfare in the late Bronze Age. It was a combination of physical combat, symbolic action, and strategic calculation. The impending duel between Achilles and Hector thus represents not only a narrative apex, but also a reflection of cultural, psychological, and tactical considerations in heroic societies, where individual valor could resonate across generations and shape collective memory. The duel between Achilles and Hector represents the narrative and emotional apex of the Iliad, a confrontation in which personal vendetta, civic duty, and divine influence converge. Homer portrays this encounter with meticulous attention to detail, emphasizing both the physical and psychological dimensions of combat. Hector, Troy's noble defender, faces the mightiest Greek warrior, fully aware that the duel may determine not only his personal fate, but the survival of the city. Hector embodies courage, strategy, and moral responsibility, fighting to defend his family, citizens, and honor, while Achilles is driven by grief, rage, and the pursuit of vengeance for Patroclus. The battle itself is a testament to the combination of skill, experience, and sheer willpower that characterizes Bronze Age elite combat. Homer describes the warriors' maneuvers, attacks, and countermoves with vivid imagery, highlighting the tension and drama of individual combat within a broader war. Chariots, spears, shields, and armor all play crucial roles, demonstrating the technological and tactical sophistication of the period. Beyond the mechanics of combat, the duel encapsulates the central themes of the Iliad: the tension between human agency and fate, the role of honor and reputation, and the inexorable presence of death. In historical terms, while such duels may be stylized or symbolic, they likely reflect the cultural reality of champion-based combat in the late Bronze Age, where elite warriors were expected to inspire troops, test enemy morale, and sometimes settle critical disputes with ritualized combat. The death of Hector marks a profound turning point in both the narrative and the war itself. Achilles strikes Hector with a fatal blow, a moment depicted with intense drama and symbolic weight. Hector's fall is catastrophic for Troy, stripping the city of its principal defender and plunging its inhabitants into despair. Homer's narrative emphasizes not only the physical consequences, but also the psychological and cultural impact. Families grieve, citizens fear, and even the gods observe with awe and lamentation. Achilles' actions following Hector's death are equally significant. He desecrates Hector's body, dragging it behind his chariot around Troy's walls. This act, shocking in modern sensibilities, underscores the complex interplay of honor, vengeance, and social norms in Homeric society. While brutal, it also reflects the cultural understanding that warfare was as much about psychological dominance and the assertion of superiority as it was about physical victory. Historically, this aligns with practices in which the treatment of enemy leaders had both symbolic and practical significance, influencing morale and demonstrating power. The aftermath of Hector's death also transforms the Greek army, providing both renewed morale and the opportunity to consolidate control over the battlefield. It represents the culmination of Achilles' wrath and the demonstration of how individual heroism, when combined with strategic leadership and psychological impact, can decisively influence the course of war. Hector's demise reshapes the morale and strategy of both the Greek and Trojan forces. For the Trojans, the loss of their champion creates a crisis of confidence and leadership. Soldiers and citizens alike grapple with fear, grief, and the daunting prospect of further losses. Leaders such as Priam must balance despair with practical action, maintaining defenses while preparing for the inevitable continuation of hostilities. For the Greeks, Hector's death brings a surge of morale, as the symbolic and strategic power of Troy's greatest warrior is removed from the battlefield. This shift allows Greek forces to press their advantage, reorganize, and launch more aggressive operations, highlighting the critical influence of elite individuals on protracted conflicts. Psychologically, the event illustrates the interplay between heroism, emotional response, and collective behavior. The presence or absence of a single leader can drastically alter the strategic environment. From a broader perspective, the Iliad uses Hector's death to explore themes of mortality, honor, vengeance, and the consequences of human ambition and pride. Archaeologically, evidence from Troy VIA, including signs of defensive reinforcements and burned fortifications, suggests a society under extreme pressure, where leadership and morale were continuously tested by sustained military pressure. The fall of Hector thus becomes both a literal and symbolic turning point, demonstrating the profound effects of individual heroism, cultural values, and psychological resilience on the outcome of ancient warfare. Following Hector's death, Troy is engulfed in grief and despair. Amid this chaos, King Priam demonstrates extraordinary courage and moral authority by deciding to approach the Greek camp personally to request the return of his son's body. Priam's journey is fraught with danger. He must navigate enemy territory, evade Greek patrols, and rely on careful negotiation to succeed. Homer emphasizes the psychological tension of this journey, highlighting Priam's dual identity as a father consumed by grief and as a king responsible for his city's survival. The expedition represents a remarkable act of diplomacy in the midst of relentless conflict, illustrating the capacity for humanity to persist even in the most violent circumstances. Priam's choice to walk alone, relying solely on courage, humility, and appeal to shared human values, underscores the profound moral message of the Iliad, that respect for life, honor, and social bonds can transcend even the most entrenched cycles of vengeance. Historically, such diplomatic gestures were not merely literary devices, but likely reflected actual practices in late Bronze Age warfare. Envoys and emissaries often negotiated truces, ransoms, and exchanges of bodies, functioning as crucial intermediaries who balanced honor, pragmatism, and morality. Priam's approach reflects both the personal stakes of war and the broader social mechanisms designed to preserve human dignity amidst prolonged violence. His courage and negotiation exemplify the strategic and ethical acumen necessary for leadership in societies where honor, family, and survival were deeply intertwined. Achilles' reaction to Priam's plea represents one of the Iliad's most profound explorations of emotion, morality, and the humanization of heroes. Though Achilles is consumed by grief and rage, the encounter with Priam evokes empathy and reflection. Homer portrays Achilles' internal conflict. His desire for vengeance and dominance clashes with his recognition of shared suffering and the inevitability of mortality. The dialogue between the two men emphasizes universal themes of fatherhood, loss, and respect for human life. Achilles ultimately honors the plea, demonstrating a capacity for mercy and ethical reasoning even amidst intense emotional turmoil. This resolution reflects the cultural and psychological sophistication of Homeric society, where heroism encompassed not only martial prowess, but also wisdom, empathy, and adherence to social norms. Historically, the act of returning a fallen enemy's body was a powerful ritual, reinforcing codes of conduct and establishing precedents for humane treatment even during brutal conflict. By granting Priam's request, Achilles ensures the preservation of Troy's dignity, albeit temporarily, and reaffirms the cultural importance of honor, ritual, and mutual respect in warfare. This episode demonstrates that, even in a war characterized by relentless violence, moments of negotiation, empathy, and ethical deliberation could influence outcomes, providing balance between heroic fury and human compassion. The successful negotiation between Priam and Achilles results in the return of Hector's body to Troy, facilitating the performance of proper funerary rites. The recovery and subsequent preparation of Hector's body represent both a religious and social imperative. Funerary rituals reaffirm communal identity, honor heroic sacrifice, and serve as a collective means of processing grief and loss. Homer details the preparation of Hector's body, the construction of his funeral pyre, and the ceremonies that accompany it, emphasizing the interplay between personal mourning, cultural tradition, and social cohesion. The temporary pause and hostilities that follows Hector's burial offers a moment of reflection, allowing both Greek and Trojan forces to regroup, mourn, and acknowledge the human costs of the war. Historically, such pauses were common in ancient conflicts, providing opportunities for replenishment, negotiation, and reaffirmation of social norms. The episode illustrates the enduring importance of ritualized behavior, ethical considerations, and leadership in maintaining cohesion during periods of extreme stress. In literary terms, the return of Hector's body highlights the Iliad's central themes: mortality, heroism, honor, and the tension between vengeance and compassion. It demonstrates that even amidst relentless warfare, human empathy and moral decision-making could shape outcomes, providing a temporary reprieve in a conflict dominated by bloodshed, divine intervention, and heroic ambition. Following the funeral of Hector, Troy faces the dual challenge of mourning its greatest hero while simultaneously preparing for the continuation of the siege. Homer emphasizes the psychological and societal impact of Hector's death. The city's morale is shaken, citizens grieve, and soldiers confront the harsh reality of their vulnerable position. Priam and other leaders must navigate these dynamics, ensuring that despair does not erode the city's capacity to defend itself. Defensive fortifications are reinforced, gates are strengthened, and strategically important positions are monitored to prevent Greek incursions. The survivors also face the logistical challenges of sustaining the population, including managing food stores, water access, and medical care for the wounded. Archaeological evidence from Troy, VA, reveals signs of hurried construction, repairs to walls, and evidence of occupation under duress, consistent with a society enduring extended conflict. The combination of civic, military, and emotional efforts reflects the complex interplay of leadership, resource management, and psychological resilience necessary to survive a protracted siege. Homer dramatizes these efforts to illustrate that war is not only a series of heroic clashes, but also a continuous struggle of planning, endurance, and adaptation. Troy's reorganization after Hector's death demonstrates that even in moments of profound loss, strategy and preparedness are essential for survival, highlighting the human capacity for resilience and the intricate demands of leadership under extreme pressure. For the Greeks, Hector's death represents both a triumph and an opportunity to reassess their approach to ending the war. Homer portrays the Greek commanders engaged in councils of war, debating the next course of action, managing resources, and addressing the varying ambitions and temperaments of coalition leaders. Agamemnon, Nestor, Odysseus, and other prominent figures discuss strategies that balance immediate tactical gains with long-term objectives, illustrating the complex dynamics of multi-leader military campaigns. The Greeks faced logistical challenges, including supply lines, troop rotations, and morale management, all of which are exacerbated by the prolonged nature of the siege. Historically, prolonged campaigns required careful coordination among allied forces, ensuring that strategic objectives were aligned and that individual leaders adhered to agreed-upon plans. The Iliad dramatizes these councils, emphasizing the tension between personal honor, ambition, and collective necessity. Elite warriors such as Achilles, whose actions could decisively shift the battlefield, further complicate these dynamics. The Greek reassessment illustrates that military success is not only determined by combat, but also by strategy, diplomacy, and leadership, factors that are often as critical as battlefield heroism. The coalition's deliberations reflect the realities of Bronze Age warfare, where the effective integration of individual capabilities, collective strategy, and logistical planning determined the ultimate outcome of extended conflicts. With Troy weakened and Greek morale boosted by the death of Hector, attention begins to shift toward the formulation of a decisive plan to conclude the conflict. While Homer's Iliad ends before the fall of Troy, later sources and archaeological interpretations suggest that Greek leaders sought strategies that would overcome the city's formidable defenses without incurring further devastating losses. The concept of trickery, deception, and targeted strikes likely became central to planning, reflecting an understanding of the limits of prolonged assault and the psychological dimensions of warfare. The Iliad's focus on heroism and individual duels foreshadows these later developments, highlighting the importance of elite warriors, strategic foresight, and coordinated effort in achieving military objectives. The Greek plan to end the war, ultimately culminating in the famous Trojan Horse stratagem, reflects a sophisticated comprehension of psychology, engineering, and coalition management. Historically, such strategies indicate that ancient warfare was not purely a contest of brute force, but also involved intelligence, planning, and adaptation to enemy strengths and vulnerabilities. The aftermath of Hector's funeral thus marks a transitional period in the war, a time of recovery, strategic reevaluation, and preparation for innovative approaches to achieve victory. This stage underscores the Iliad's enduring theme that war is a multidimensional enterprise, shaped by heroism, leadership, logistics, and ingenuity, blending mythic narrative with plausible historical processes. After Hector's death and the temporary lull following his funeral, the Greek leadership begins to focus on strategies that could finally break the stalemate of the decade-long siege. Homer emphasizes that while heroism on the battlefield is crucial, military success also depends on planning, foresight, and exploiting the enemy's vulnerabilities. The Greek commanders, including Agamemnon, Odysseus, Nestor, and Diomedes, convene councils to assess their current resources, troop readiness, and the psychological state of the Trojans. These deliberations reveal the complexity of leading a coalition army. Each commander has distinct motivations, loyalties, and personal ambitions, which must be balanced against the collective goal of conquering Troy. Logistics, such as ensuring sufficient food, weapons, and reinforcements, are carefully considered, as are the timing and location of attacks. Homer's narrative, while primarily focused on heroic exploits, acknowledges the importance of such planning, blending individual valor with strategic acumen. Historically, Bronze Age warfare required meticulous organization. Prolonged sieges tested leadership, resource management, and morale. The Greeks' planning phase underscores the realization that brute force alone was insufficient to breach Troy's formidable defenses. Instead, success would depend on combining military might, intelligence, and psychological strategy, foreshadowing the inventive tactics that would ultimately bring the war to a close. Homer hints at the Greeks' increasing reliance on cunning and deception, highlighting the evolving nature of warfare in response to extended sieges. Elite warriors, particularly Odysseus, begin to explore strategies that exploit Trojan expectations and complacency. These early attempts involve feigned retreats, false signals, and minor deceptive maneuvers designed to test the enemy's vigilance. By observing Trojan reactions, the Greeks gather intelligence and psychologically condition their opponents to anticipate standard military action while remaining unaware of more sophisticated schemes. The narrative emphasizes the interplay between intelligence, morale, and battlefield behavior. Even the bravest soldiers can be destabilized if faced with unexpected tactics. In a broader cultural context, these maneuvers reflect the Greek admiration for métis, or cunning, a trait valued alongside physical courage. Historically, such approaches are consistent with known Bronze Age military practices in which deception, ambush, and psychological manipulation were essential components of protracted warfare. Commanders understood that physical destruction alone was rarely sufficient, undermining the enemy's confidence, inducing fatigue, and exploiting human error often proved decisive. The early psychological maneuvers foreshadow the more elaborate schemes, including the Trojan Horse, demonstrating that strategy in ancient warfare was as much about perception, persuasion, and human behavior as it was about direct combat. The Greeks' focus on psychological manipulation directly targets the Trojans' morale and readiness. After Hector's death, the Trojans are vulnerable both physically and emotionally. Greek leaders recognize that sustained pressure, uncertainty, and subtle threats can weaken the city from within, making victory easier to achieve. Trojans are subjected to a combination of constant observation, feigned attacks, and the exploitation of fear and superstition. Homer emphasizes the mental strain on defenders, sleepless nights, heightened anxiety, and the psychological burden of defending a city without its most capable leader gradually erode resilience. This type of warfare demonstrates the Greeks' understanding of the human dimension of conflict. Success requires not only defeating soldiers, but also undermining their confidence, inducing hesitation, and shaping perceptions of inevitability. Archaeological evidence from Troy VIA suggests that such prolonged stress may have had tangible effects on the city's fortifications, structures, and population, consistent with a narrative depiction of a community under siege and psychological pressure. The combination of tactical preparation, early deception, and psychological manipulation illustrates the multidimensional nature of ancient warfare, blending brute force, cunning, and the understanding of human behavior. By strategically influencing Trojan perception, the Greeks set the stage for the climactic operations that would ultimately determine the outcome of the war, highlighting the sophisticated interplay of intellect, emotion, and martial prowess in epic and historical contexts. After years of protracted siege and repeated losses, Greek commanders recognized that direct assaults on Troy's formidable fortifications were unlikely to succeed without incurring catastrophic casualties. The war demanded a solution that combined tactical ingenuity, psychological manipulation, and the bravery of elite warriors. Homer's narrative, while focused primarily on heroic exploits, foreshadows this strategic ingenuity by highlighting the Greeks' increasing reliance on cunning, deception, and intelligence gathering. Odysseus, renowned for his métis, or cleverness, emerges as a central architect in devising a plan that exploits the Trojans' expectations and overconfidence. The concept of the Trojan Horse, a massive wooden structure concealing elite Greek warriors, represents a remarkable synthesis of engineering skill, strategic foresight, and psychological manipulation. By presenting the horse as a purported offering to the gods and symbol of Greek retreat, the Greeks exploit Trojan religiosity, curiosity, and vanity, demonstrating the integration of cultural understanding into military strategy. Historically, the idea of using deception to penetrate fortified cities is consistent with the practices of Bronze Age warfare, where indirect strategies, surprise attacks, and manipulation of perception often determine the outcome of conflicts. The Greek plan reflects a profound understanding of human behavior. Achieving victory required not only physical strength, but also the ability to shape enemy expectations, manipulate morale, and orchestrate conditions in which psychological pressure led to self-inflicted vulnerability. This stage marks the culmination of years of tactical evolution, combining heroism, intellect, and calculated risk to produce a decisive outcome. The creation of the Trojan horse exemplifies the intersection of material craftsmanship, symbolism, and strategic deception. Skilled Greek artisans, likely under the guidance of Odysseus and other leaders, constructed a massive hollow wooden structure capable of concealing a select group of elite warriors. Homer's narrative emphasizes the symbolic significance of the horse. It is presented as an offering to Athena, a gesture intended to deceive the Trojans into believing it represents Greek surrender and piety. This dual purpose, practical concealment of warriors and psychological manipulation, is central to the plan's effectiveness. The horse serves as both a physical Trojan breach and a tool for exploiting the defender's cognitive biases, appealing to pride, superstition, and curiosity. Historically, the ingenuity of such a stratagem is consistent with Bronze Age military practices, in which siegecraft, cunning, and technological adaptation were critical for overcoming heavily fortified cities. The construction process, careful concealment, and attention to symbolism reflect the Greeks' understanding that warfare is as much about influencing perception and morale as it is about material strength. This strategic object embodies the fusion of intellect, heroism, and psychological insight. It is simultaneously a weapon, a ruse, and a representation of the calculated intelligence required to end a protracted, high-stakes conflict. The Trojan horse illustrates how elite warriors, leadership, and creative problem-solving were integrated into military operations, providing both immediate tactical advantage and enduring cultural resonance. The Trojan horse strategy also underscores the complex relationship between individual heroism and collective planning in the Iliad's broader narrative framework. While elite warriors like Achilles, Odysseus, and Diomedes had previously dominated the battlefield through martial prowess, the horse represents an alternative form of heroism, one rooted in intellect, foresight, and psychological manipulation. The plan required precise coordination, discipline, and trust among the Greek leaders and warriors. Those hidden within the horse had to remain concealed, execute their assault at the optimal moment, and exploit the confusion to maximum effect. Homer's focus on heroism, divine influence, and cunning suggests that victory was conceived not merely as an outcome of brute force, but also as a product of creativity, adaptability, and strategic sophistication. The Trojans, deceived by the horse's symbolic and aesthetic appeal, unknowingly facilitated their own downfall, a testament to the Greeks' mastery of both physical and psychological warfare. Historically, the interplay of visible heroism, battlefield exploits, and strategic cunning reflects a nuanced understanding of leadership and military effectiveness in the late Bronze Age. The Trojan Horse exemplifies how complex operations can combine intelligence, skill, and coordinated action to achieve results unattainable through straightforward combat alone. By integrating heroism, deception, and psychological insight, the Greeks devised a plan that would decisively end the war, demonstrating the multidimensional nature of strategy, courage, and ingenuity in ancient conflict. The execution of the Trojan Horse plan begins with the deliberate concealment of elite Greek warriors within a massive wooden structure. Homer's later narratives and classical interpretations describe the Greeks feigning retreat, leaving the horse at the gates of Troy while sailing to a nearby shore under cover of darkness. This strategic withdrawal was essential. It created the illusion of Greek defeat, inspiring a false sense of security among the Trojans. Psychological manipulation is central to this phase. The Trojans, perceiving the horse as a peace offering and divine tribute, failed to suspect its hidden purpose. This stage demonstrates the Greeks' sophisticated understanding of enemy perception and morale. By crafting a scenario that leverages pride, superstition, and curiosity, they induce a lapse in vigilance. Historical parallels in Bronze Age siege warfare suggest that deception, feigned retreat, and the exploitation of human behavior were common tactics, designed to overcome the challenges of fortified cities and extended campaigns. The concealment of warriors, meticulous timing, and precise coordination underscore the strategic complexity of the plan, highlighting the necessity of discipline, secrecy, and trust among those executing it. The Greeks' withdrawal, while physically minimal in terms of forces, has profound psychological impact. It manipulates the Trojans into believing they have survived the siege, lowering defenses and opening the door for a decisive assault. The Trojans' decision to bring the horse into the city epitomizes the interplay of human error, pride, and cultural norms. Homer portrays the city's leaders debating the horse's significance. Some argue it is a gift from the gods. Others suspect deception, yet curiosity and a desire to claim victory outweigh caution. Their misjudgment reflects both cognitive biases and the cultural importance of honoring religious symbols and perceived divine favor. Bringing the horse inside the fortified city exemplifies the consequences of hubris and overconfidence, demonstrating how psychological manipulation can override strategic prudence. The Trojans' failure is compounded by the visual impact and symbolic interpretation of the horse. It represents a supposed Greek surrender, a votive offering to Athena, and a tangible monument to their perceived triumph. In reality, this convergence of symbolic significance and physical concealment enables the Greeks' final maneuver. Archaeological analysis of Troy 80's destruction layers suggests that prolonged siege, structural strain, and cumulative fatigue may have rendered the defenders vulnerable to lapses in judgment, lending historical plausibility to Homer's narrative. The Trojan misjudgment illustrates the broader principle that in warfare, perception, morale, and cultural interpretation can be as decisive as weaponry, fortifications, or numbers. This moment marks the tipping point in the conflict, where human psychology, strategic deception, and heroic cunning converge to produce irreversible consequences. With the horse securely inside the city walls, the Greek warriors concealed within emerge under the cover of darkness to open Troy's gates for the returning Greek army. The assault is swift and overwhelming. Soldiers spread throughout the city, targeting key leaders, fortifications, and civilian strongholds. Homer emphasizes the chaos, terror, and portraying a city consumed by fire, bloodshed, and panic. Troy, which had resisted a decade-long siege through courage, fortifications, and heroic leadership, succumbs to a combination of cunning, strategic planning, and psychological manipulation. The fall of the city demonstrates the multifaceted nature of warfare. It is not merely a contest of strength, but also an orchestration of intelligence, deception, and coordination. Survivors face death, enslavement, or displacement, highlighting the totalizing consequences of prolonged conflict. The Greek victory underscores the integration of heroism and strategy. Elite warriors, tactical foresight, and manipulation of human perception coalesce to achieve a result unattainable through conventional assault alone. Archaeological evidence of Troy's destruction, including burned layers, collapsed fortifications, and sudden abandonment, aligns with Homeric descriptions, suggesting that the mythic narrative preserves a memory of historical catastrophe. The night assault illustrates how strategic ingenuity, psychological insight, and disciplined execution combined with elite martial prowess to produce a decisive outcome, marking the culmination of the Trojan War and the transformation of both Greek and Trojan societies through conflict, loss, and triumph. The fall of Troy marked the end of a city that had endured a decade-long siege, heroic sacrifices, and devastating losses. Homer and later classical sources describe the fate of the surviving Trojans. Many were killed in the assault, while others, including women and children, were taken as slaves by the Greek victors. This systematic dispersal reflects both the brutal realities of ancient warfare and the social and economic practices of time. Enslavement was not merely punitive, but also a pragmatic aspect of Bronze Age conflict. Captured populations could be integrated into the victor's workforce, contributing to agriculture, domestic labor, or military service. Women of status, such as princesses and priestesses, were often distributed among Greek leaders as concubines or household attendants, a practice that reinforced social hierarchies and the spoils of victory. Homer's narratives emphasize both the pathos and inevitability of this outcome, illustrating the human cost of prolonged conflict. The psychological impact on the survivors, the traumatized, and those witnessing the city's destruction would have been profound, reshaping familial structures, civic identity, and collective memory. Archaeological evidence from Troy VA shows abrupt abandonment, burned layers, and signs of rapid destruction, supporting the historical plausibility of sudden conquest, population displacement, and the systematic devastation of material and cultural infrastructure. The dispersal and enslavement of Trojans highlight the harsh realities of ancient warfare, in which victory was inseparable from the exercise of power, domination, and the reconfiguration of social and economic order. While the Greeks achieved victory, the aftermath of the war was far from celebratory. Homer's post-war narratives, including the Odyssey and other epics, emphasize the extensive challenges faced by returning warriors. The decade-long siege had depleted resources, strained alliances, and inflicted considerable casualties on Greek forces. Leaders and heroes such as Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, and Diomedes encountered diverse fates. Some faced treacherous journeys home, internal rebellion, or murder. Others were forced to negotiate with hostile territories and navigate complex political landscapes. Heroism on the battlefield had to be reconciled with the logistical and political challenges of post-war life, illustrating the multidimensional consequences of protracted conflict. The cultural memory of the war also became central to Greek identity, as stories of courage, cunning, and sacrifice were preserved through oral tradition and later literary works. Monuments, burial practices, and ritual commemorations reinforced the social significance of heroic deeds and provided frameworks for interpreting the war's moral and ethical dimensions. Historically, The dispersal of victorious forces, negotiation for safe return, and reintegration into society were critical aspects of the post-conflict period in the Late Bronze Age. Greek survivors not only returned with spoils and captives, but also carried the psychological imprint of the siege, shaping subsequent social, political, and cultural developments. The war thus produced enduring legacies of heroism, trauma, and societal transformation, blending mythic narrative with historical realities. The Trojan War's impact extended far beyond immediate military outcomes, becoming a foundational element of Greek cultural identity and moral reflection. Homeric epics, oral traditions, and later literary works preserve the memory of heroism, sacrifice, and strategic ingenuity, embedding these narratives into the collective imagination of Greek society. Troy itself became a symbol of both human ambition and vulnerability, exemplifying the consequences of pride, hubris, and the relentless pursuit of glory. The war's heroes, from Achilles' wrath and cunning to Hector's courage and moral integrity, offered paradigms for understanding valor, honor, and ethical conduct. Archaeological findings in Troy VA and Mycenaean Greece lend credence to the possibility that these narratives reflect a historical core. Fortified cities, destruction layers, and evidence of protracted sieges suggest that a conflict resembling the Homeric War may have occurred, later mythologized to convey moral, cultural, and heroic lessons. The legacy of Troy endured through centuries, influencing Greek literature, philosophy, and even political thought, serving as a cautionary tale about the costs of war, the importance of diplomacy, and the interplay between human agency and fate. By integrating historical plausibility with epic narrative, the story of Troy becomes a lens through which societies examine heroism, morality, and the consequences of human conflict. The cultural memory of Troy thus transcends its temporal and geographic boundaries, preserving the war's lessons and mythic resonance for generations. The aftermath of the Trojan War had profound implications for Greek society beyond the immediate battlefield. Survivors of the war, including warriors, commanders, and their households, often dispersed across the Mediterranean in search of safe return, new settlements, or political influence. Homer's epics hint at these journeys, most notably in the Odyssey, where Odysseus' decade-long voyage home represents the broader Greek experience of displacement, exploration, and adaptation following the war. This diaspora facilitated cultural and economic exchanges across the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean, spreading Mycenaean influence and introducing Greek martial, religious, and artistic practices to previously unconnected regions. Sites across modern-day Greece, the Aegean Islands, Anatolia, and the Levant show evidence of Mycenaean pottery, fortifications, and burial practices, indicating a network of cultural transmission likely accelerated by returning warriors and migrating populations. This movement had both practical and symbolic consequences. It reinforced Greek identity, spread martial traditions, and contributed to the political restructuring of post-war territories. Homer's narratives preserve these movements through mythic storytelling, blending historical plausibility with literary dramatization, emphasizing the interconnection between war, mobility, and the shaping of new political landscapes. In practical terms, the dispersion of Greek populations after the Trojan War mirrors the patterns of migration and settlement common in the Late Bronze Age, where warfare, resource scarcity, and political opportunity drove the reconfiguration of societies and the diffusion of cultural practices. The Trojan War, whether historical or mythologized, left lasting repercussions on Mediterranean political dynamics and trade networks. Cities in Anatolia, the Aegean, and beyond were affected by the destruction, redistribution, and resettlement of populations. Greek city-states leveraged the experiences and spoils of war to expand influence, form alliances, and secure trade routes. Homer's narrative, while primarily concerned with heroism and divine intervention, implicitly reflects these broader consequences. The war necessitated prolonged resource management, interpolis coordination, and strategic diplomacy, all of which influenced the post-war geopolitical landscape. Archaeological evidence suggests that the collapse of Troy Via and contemporaneous Mycenaean centers coincides with broader regional disruptions, including shifts in settlement patterns, fortification construction, and trade relationships. The movement of survivors and the redistribution of wealth contributed to economic flux, the establishment of new trade hubs, and the consolidation of Greek maritime power. Additionally, the cultural memory of the war reinforced concepts of strategic cunning, heroism, and the consequences of hubris, shaping political and military thought. The Trojan War, therefore, was not a localized event, but a catalyst for broader transformation, influencing diplomacy, commerce, and military innovation across the Mediterranean. Its legacy persisted through oral traditions, epic poetry, and subsequent historical reflection, establishing Troy as both a cautionary tale and a symbol of cultural identity. Troy's enduring mythic and historical significance transcends its immediate destruction, influencing centuries of Greek cultural, literary, and moral frameworks. Homeric epics, particularly the Iliad and Odyssey, preserved not only the narrative of heroic exploits, but also embedded moral, ethical, and philosophical reflections on war, fate, and human behavior. The figure of Troy became emblematic of the interplay between human ambition, divine intervention, and the consequences of conflict, shaping Greek identity and providing a lens through which subsequent generations interpreted history. Archaeological excavations at Hizarlik, modern Turkey, reveal multiple layers of settlement and destruction, suggesting that the memory of a catastrophic siege may have been preserved and mythologized over centuries, integrating historical events into literary tradition. Troy's influence extended beyond literature. It informed political discourse, inspired architectural and artistic endeavors, and reinforced moral narratives regarding leadership, courage, and strategy. Greek colonists, returning warriors, and migrating populations carried these narratives across the Mediterranean, embedding the lessons of Troy into civic, religious, and educational practices. The mythic resonance of Troy ensured that the city's story remained relevant, serving as both historical memory and cultural touchstone. The Trojan War's narrative, whether grounded in actual events or shaped through centuries of oral tradition, demonstrates the intricate relationship between memory, myth, and historical interpretation, highlighting how human societies preserve, adapt, and learn from the profound consequences of conflict. The Trojan War's narrative became one of the most enduring stories in Western literature, preserved primarily through Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and later through Roman adaptations like Virgil's Aeneid. Homeric epics immortalized the heroism, cunning, and tragedy of both Greeks and Trojans, blending historical plausibility with mythic exaggeration. The Iliad, in particular, focuses on a relatively brief period during the war, yet provides profound insight into character, society, and values, capturing both personal and collective dimensions of conflict. Achilles' wrath, Hector's courage, and Priam's courage in appealing to Achilles reflect timeless human emotions: grief, honor, empathy, and the consequences of pride and vengeance. These narratives established a literary framework that influenced centuries of storytelling, from Greek tragedy to Renaissance epics, offering models of heroism, moral dilemmas, and a tension between human agency and divine will. The Trojan War became more than history. It became a literary touchstone that allowed societies to explore questions of morality, leadership, and the human condition. Subsequent dramatists, poets, and historians adapted the war's themes to reflect contemporary values and anxieties, demonstrating the flexibility of myth to convey universal truths. The enduring literary presence of Troy underscores the capacity of myth to serve as a repository of cultural memory, a lens for ethical reflection, and a vehicle for artistic expression, connecting generations across time and geography through the power of narrative. Beyond literature, the Trojan War shaped cultural identity, ethical reflection, and civic ideals across the Greek world and into Roman and later European thought. The narrative illustrates the consequences of hubris, the valorization of courage, and the necessity of strategic intelligence, offering both moral lessons and political models. For example, Achilles embodies both the brilliance and danger of unbridled individualism. Hector represents civic responsibility, moral courage, and duty to one's people. Priam demonstrates humility, compassion, and the capacity for diplomacy in the face of overwhelming personal grief. These archetypes informed Greek education, civic discourse, and philosophical debate, providing exemplars for leaders, soldiers, and citizens alike. Rituals, commemorations, and the transmission of these narratives reinforced social cohesion, memorializing the sacrifices of war while embedding ethical and practical lessons into collective consciousness. Even centuries later, Troy and its associated narratives influenced Renaissance literature, Enlightenment political thought, and modern interpretations of war and heroism. The Trojan War thus transcends its historical or mythic origins, becoming a cultural lens through which societies examine leadership, morality, and the human consequences of conflict. By engaging with the story of Troy, communities explored the dynamics of honor, vengeance, strategy, and ethical decision-making, demonstrating the enduring relevance of myth in shaping civic and moral identity. Modern scholarship, archaeology, and historical analysis have further expanded Troy's significance, bridging myth and reality. Heinrich Schliemann's excavations at Hizarlik in the 19th century reignited interest in the possibility of a historical Troy, revealing layered settlements, fortifications, and evidence of violent destruction consistent with prolonged conflict. While the exact historicity of the Trojan War remains debated, these findings underscore the plausibility of large-scale Bronze Age warfare and the potential kernel of truth behind Homeric narratives. The integration of literary tradition, archaeological evidence, and historical context has created a multidimensional understanding of the war, highlighting how societies preserve memory, mythologize events, and interpret the past to inform identity and values. In modern times, Troy's story continues to captivate popular imagination through novels, films, art, and scholarship, demonstrating the timeless fascination with heroism, strategy, tragedy, and moral reflection. The enduring legacy of the Trojan War lies not only in its historical or literary value, but in its capacity to illuminate human experience, ethical decision-making, and the consequences of ambition, pride, and resilience. From antiquity to the present, Troy remains a symbol of the interplay between myth and history, heroism and morality, reminding humanity of the profound impact of war, storytelling, and cultural memory on civilization. And that brings us to the end of our epic journey through the Trojan War. Today, we've witnessed the rise and fall of heroes, the cleverness and cunning that determine the fate of entire cities, and the profound consequences of pride, honor, and vengeance. We saw how Achilles' wrath, Hector's bravery, and Priam's courage shaped not only the war, but the cultural memory that lasted for thousands of years. We explored how the Greeks' clever strategies, like the Trojan Horse, combined intelligence, heroism, and psychological insight to bring an end to the decade-long siege. And we've seen that the story of Troy is more than myth. It reflects history, human ambition, and lessons that remain relevant even today. The moral of this story is clear. Courage alone is not enough. Intelligence and empathy matter in decisions, whether of kings, warriors, or citizens, shape the fate of entire societies. Every action carries weight, and history remembers both heroism and folly. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Trojan War, don't forget to subscribe to History Teller YT and turn on notifications so you never miss a story from the past. We'll be back soon with more incredible histories, untold tales, and lessons from the past that still resonate today. Thank you for listening, and remember, history isn't just about the past. It's the story of who we are. See you in the next episode.